Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Adam Bryant, Senior Advisor to the Reuben Mark Initiative for Organizational Character and Leadership, which is a joint initiative between the business and law schools to teach the leadership lessons and strategies necessary to develop strong organizational cultures. Big thanks to Reuben Mark, who's joining us. He's the guy with the telltale white beard in one of your screens, and thank you for his support. If you haven't read much about Reuben, I encourage you to do so. He is in a very small club of CEOs who was in the job for a very long time, 25 years. That's incredibly rare. Owes a lot of his success to a really strong culture. And if you Google my name and his name, you'll see a couple of the interviews I did. There's just a tremendous amount of insights and very practical tips on culture in there. We're thrilled to have as our guest today, Laurel Richie, who I first met in 2012. When I interviewed her for the Corner Office feature I started at the New York Times, back when she was president of the WNBA. I'm very proud to call her a colleague today at our firm, Merrick & Company, where we do one-to-one mentoring with C-suite leaders. I'm going to skip over the bio. If you've probably read it already about Laurel, very rich background we're going to hear about today. And just in terms of the format and flow, you all submitted great questions. We're going to get to those very quickly. I'm going to start things off with just a few quick ones to help us get to know Laurel a little better. But first off, Laurel, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
That's great. So Laurel, let's go back earlier in your life. Tell us about your early years as a kid. Who and what were the big important influence that really shaped who you are today?
Yeah, so I am originally from Shaker Heights, Ohio, right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And my parents were, as it is true for most of us, the greatest influence on my life, but also my leadership. And I think it's particularly with all the current events and conversations going on in our country and around the world related to social justice and anti-racism. The house that I grew up in, my parents went to buy land to build a house, and the people who owned the land wouldn't sell it to them because they were Black. Some friends of theirs who were white bought the land, sold it to my parents at cost. And that's the neighborhood that I grew up in. You know, at this point in time, I was right in first grade. So my memories are of just moving into a new house and the new pajamas that my mother bought me to welcome me to my new home. But I think I often look back on that and think about, I just feel like somewhere in my DNA is a commitment to equality and to blazing trails.
That's great. And, you know, these top leadership positions, I've really come to appreciate. They're really tough jobs. They require a tremendous amount of resilience and drive and stamina. And I'm just wondering, where did those come from for you?
You know, I know it's going to sound like a cliche, but I have always looked for work that I want to do, not work that I have to do. And so my work, whether it was in the world of advertising or chief marketing officer for Girl Scouts of the USA, I was a Girl Scout growing up. I believe very strongly in helping to raise the next generation of female leaders. At the WNBA, getting this country comfortable with the notion of women as athletes. All of my work has been my passion, so drive was never an issue. That didn't mean I didn't get exhausted, and there were times when it was hard or frustrating, but the fact that I had the luxury to pursue work that I love made it really not feel like work.
That's great. One more question from me, and then everybody can raise their virtual hand to ask the next question. But you know, we are talking about cultures in part here. That's the focus of the Reuben Mark Initiative. For you worked in a lot of different organizations. You've led different organizations. What to you are the hallmarks of healthy and unhealthy cultures?
Yeah, so I think healthy cultures for organizations are like healthy lifestyles for human beings, right? You know, so I think it's about having good core values living and running the organization according to those values, staying firm and holding on to those values during the tough times when the values are challenged. I think it's about, I also think it's about focus. You know, if I think organizations that have 3 to 5 cultures that they deeply, deeply believe in have, in my opinion, a better chance of living according to those values because they've chosen them carefully, they've been selective, and it is as much about what they choose not to do as what they choose to do. So I think real rigor around that process leads to strong cultures.
And amen from me on that, just in terms of, you know, the exercise so many companies go through with creating values. I mean, over the roughly 600 leaders I've interviewed over the last decade or so, I often ask them, you know, I'd love to hear what your values are. And it often happens that many of them can't remember all their values because they have 7 or 10 or even 12. So completely agree with you on that focus. We were talking, everybody, before the session started, just how great your questions were that you submitted. So we'd love to get those going now. So who would like to ask the first question? Ella Epstein.
Hi, everyone. Ms. Richie, thank you so much for taking the time today, especially you know, given the current circumstances, everyone being on Zoom for the umpteenth month. And my question is actually related to the pandemic and leadership during really extraordinary and hopefully once in a generation phenomena or less phenomena. My question is, what do you think we can learn and take forward, both from perhaps an individual perspective? I'd be curious to learn what you're, you know, thinking about over these past few months, and also as leaders, what do you think should be the traits and the orientation of a leader right now, that and also lessons that one can take into hopefully a pandemic-less future?
Yeah,
Thank
you for that question. And for all of you, please call me Laurel. I appreciate the respect, Ella, but you can call me Laurel. You know, I think that this pandemic has really underscored that we are a global community. And we often think about our global connectedness in terms of technology or commerce, or the way in which goods and services are produced in one country and shipped to another. There are a whole host of ways that we think about the world. And I think this pandemic has brought home to us our humanity and our vulnerability and our connectedness. And I think that if we can tap into that renewed appreciation of how much we need to rely on each other and that we are all in this together, I think that would be a terrific outcome of a very devastating event for many, many people. In terms of leadership, you know, I've always believed that you can't start to think about who you are as a leader in the middle of a crisis. You've got to have that figured out so that you can tap into it in the middle of a crisis. And so for me, the leaders that I've watched really help their organizations and their employees and their customers through these very challenging and uncertain times are the same list of leaders that I looked up to before the pandemic because they were really, really good leaders. So that's how I think about leadership in the middle of a crisis. If you're sorting it out at the beginning of the crisis, you're a little late.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Shannon, I believe you're next.
Hi, I also echo the thank you for taking the time to be with us today. as an avid WNBA follower, I am very curious to hear your thoughts as what it will take for the WNBA to get to the next level. We've seen the growth in viewership and the growth in fans attending games year after year, but what do you think it will take to really get the WNBA to achieve its full potential?
Yeah, well, shout out to you for being a fan. I love it when I meet a fellow WNBA fan. You know, I think it's going to take two things. I think on one hand, it is going to take this continued steady progress of fan by fan, sponsor by sponsor engagement. On the other hand, I often, when I was running the WNBA, looked at other sports leagues and other sports, and when did they have sort of a catalyst moment that sort of that just sort of dramatically increased the trajectory of their growth and their success. And so if I look at the NBA, it was Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and this great rivalry coming in. When I look at women's tennis, I look at the Venus and Serena, who were this sort of, when they started playing and came onto the scene, you know, everybody was like, wait a minute, who are they? We haven't heard of them. They haven't been in the junior leagues. Oh my gosh, they're sisters. They're really good. So there was this whole narrative that just sort of took us by surprise. So I think what it really takes is some truly breakout talent, and I don't mean any disrespect to any player in the WNBA right now. And I think it takes some rivalries. So some really strong rivalries of players coming in. You know, one of the greatest moments when I was at the WNBA was the year that Brittany Griner, Skylar Diggins, and Elena Deladon came in. And what was unique is that these were three athletes from totally different backgrounds, totally different personalities, totally different style of play. And they came in together, and the excitement from ESPN, from our fans, from print media just sort of accelerated. So I think we just need a series of those to sort of attract attention from that gets beyond sort of our hardcore fan base to sort of the ripple effect of those who are familiar but haven't quite engaged.
Thanks for the question, Shannon. Who's next? And I've always got lots of questions, so if anybody doesn't raise their hand soon. There we go. Ella Epstein, you're in line again.
Sorry, it's me one more time. I actually just have a clarification from earlier. When you said that companies, and sorry, this is kind of shifting, well, perhaps it's also in the WNBA, but shifting back to, I guess, a more theoretical question. When you said that companies that have 3 to 5 cultures and really know them well can thrive, I suppose I'm uncertain as to what you mean by multiple cultures. How does that work?
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. I meant to say 3 to 5 values. And those values then contribute to the culture. And the other thing that I would say, as long as we're clarifying on that one, is I think the other piece about defining values for an organization is to work really hard to get beyond what I would call table stakes values. You know, every organization should operate with integrity and respect and trust and communication and valuing employees and customers. I think where you start to build unique cultures is when you look at values that sit on top of those table stakes values. So it's the values, the short list of values that help you build the culture.
Thank you. That makes sense.
So I'll jump in. Laurel, you talked earlier about, you know, in the middle of a crisis is not the time to figure out who you are as a leader. You're doing a lot of mentoring with C-suite executives now. How do you help people kind of figure out who they are as leaders, what their values are? You know, this whole idea of authentic leadership, what does that mean, and how do you drive that conversation to help people reflect on that?
Yeah. So I think there's a piece of authentic leadership is the hard work of sitting down and figuring out who you are, right? What do you value? there are all sorts of exercises you can do. There's the one that says, what's your legacy? What do you want written on your tombstone? It's a little morbid, but write down how you would like your children to think about you. So there are lots of ways of projecting out into the future. How do you want to be remembered? And I do think there's value in that. I think there's also looking at going back through your own life experience and the moments where you felt truly empowered, the moments where you felt you truly made a difference. What was it about those moments that really spoke to you and stayed with you? Because more often than not, those are the things that define who you are as a person. So I think that is a really important exercise to take the time to think about how you want to show up in the world and how you want to be remembered, and what impact you hope to lead. It was when I started in advertising, I chose that field because I wanted a creative field, and I wanted a field with lots of that required me to work with lots of different kinds of people. So I was choosing a field, and every career choice I made after that was all about empowering women. That I realized that my calling, my passion, my gift was I wanted to leave the world a better place for the next generation of women. And that led me, if you had told me at 5'4", having never played the game of basketball, that I would run a sports league, I would have paid you $1 million because it would have been a great bet. But that work for me was less about running a sports league and more about giving young girls, and quite frankly, young boys, the opportunity to see what women can be as athletes and what athletes can be as citizens. So I think it's digging deep for that self-reflection, and then bringing the very best of that to the work that you choose to do.
That's great. Here we go. Lee Adler, you're up next.
Hi, Laurel. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited to speak to you because I am an NBA and WNBA fan as well. And a question that sort of leads on from Shannon, but also ties into what you were just addressing in terms of women's empowerment and opportunities for women's empowerment, is the sort of natural tension that exists within the NBA or sports leagues in general between players and front office, and especially what I'm referring to is salary negotiations and salary discrepancies. So I think probably the most egregious example that people might be familiar with is Scottie Pippen, and how he was, undervalued relative to his skill set. But I think this happens all the time in female sports across the board. Women's sports. Can you maybe address how you handle that tension in terms of empowering the players and supporting them and putting them in a place to get what's fair for them, but then also the sort of front office administrative tension in doing what's best in a business sense?
Yeah. So what's really interesting, and this may speak to the fact that the WNBA, when I was there, had not even reached its 20th anniversary. So we were, and I would argue the WNBA still is a relatively young league finding its way. And one of the things that I loved about the WNBA is that that tension or adversarial relationship that tends to exist in some sports leagues between the front office and the players and the union didn't really exist for the WNBA. To be clear, we when we were negotiating the collective bargaining agreement, we were absolutely negotiating, and the union was doing their very best to represent the players, and I was doing my very best to represent the franchises. But underneath that, there was a shared understanding that we were in it together to grow the league, and that we needed each other in order to do that, right? The league doesn't exist without the 144 fabulous athletes who are on the court, and we provide the arenas and the fans and the ESPN television deals, and we work to get sponsorships for shoes and balls and everything, and uniforms and everything else. So I think I would characterize it, I can't speak to other leagues, but for us, there was a level of great respect and a shared goal. The other thing, just as an aside, that I'll share the story, I had never been in contract negotiations before, right? And it wasn't until we got to that point that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is now part of my job. I'm in charge of this. And luckily, the woman who was running the Players Association at that time was an African-American woman who happened to go to Dartmouth for undergraduate. I'm an African-American woman who happened to go to Dartmouth as an undergraduate. And I called her up and I said, look, I know that we're about to go into a negotiation and we're going to have to, we will be on opposite sides of the table through this process. But I would like to offer to you the opportunity for us to do this in a different way. And is this a way in which we as women leading these, in our respective roles, can we show the men's league how to do this? Can we become the example of a new way of doing this rather than falling into a trap of go at it, midnight, late night? And I'm really proud of the fact that, again, it was a negotiation, but we said, we are going to do this with grace, with elegance. We're going to be inclusive, and we're going to get to a place where we feel like it is win-win for all involved. So I'm really proud of the way we did that.
That's great.
Thank you.
And we should also be noted, you may have seen this in Laurel's bio, but she is now the board chair at Dartmouth College, where she went to undergrad. Erin McKissick, you're next.
Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight. Also a huge basketball fan, so this is very exciting. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the idea of being a trailblazer and kind of the almost maybe burdens and benefits of that, because I could imagine that on one hand, being the first person of color to lead a major national league is this incredible accomplishment. And at the same time, maybe you feel as though other people want you to represent your race or your gender in a way that can just be a challenge or a burden. And I'm wondering how you balance sort of bringing that with you to work every day while not constantly being defined by it and only by that part of you.
Yeah. So my grandmother always used to say, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so I just believe that I view it as an honor to be the first or the only. And most often, almost every job I've ever had, I have been, after my entry level, I have been the first and the only, whether that's a female, an African-American, or an African-American woman. So I start from a place of gratitude. And to me, the trailblazing is less about me and more about all the people behind me who, if I can crack the door open, I'm counting on the next generation to take the door off its hinges. So that's the upside and the positive of it. I will also say that I wouldn't call it a burden, but there have been points in time in my career where I've had to take a break, right? Where I have felt that I was asked to take on a disproportionate role in educating, in informing, and a lot of that I did very gratefully. But there were times at each of the places where I worked where I literally went to management and said, I'm happy to do this work. But I just need a break from it right now. And so your job is to continue to find more women and more people of color so that this role can be shared by others. And even as recently as 3 weeks ago, I realized, I I think it was a Wednesday, and I was on my 6th Zoom meeting of the day where some group of people were asking for my help and assistance in thinking about how to help their organizations become or live into their anti-racist aspirations. And it was, I literally in the middle of the Zoom call sent a note to people and said, I'll be back tomorrow, but for today, I got to close the blinds, lock, the store's closed until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And I did that because I realized I just needed a little bit of time to pace myself, to re-energize, and, came back the next day and was back at it. But I think you're right to recognize that there are positives to it, but there are also times when you just have to restore and refuel yourself for the work. But it's important work in my book.
Thank you. Ahmed Imam, next question.
Hi, Laurel. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining us today. I'm in the law school, and so I just had a quick question as far as what your relationship was like with your general counsel. How closely did you work with him or her? And how pivotal do you feel like that role is in either the WNBA, NBA, or any sports league in general?
Hi, I think the role is incredible, and I on all facets, right? So the general counsel, we interacted when we were reviewing player contracts, when at one point the team in Chicago was transferring to Dallas. And so how to extract one ownership group and bring another one in, and how did we do that, and which pieces of all the contractual relationships were to be honored, which could be renegotiated, and which we could get out of. The legal counsel was I was their right hand during the CBA negotiations, right? The binder is about this big, so I could talk about theory and what I wanted it to feel like and what I wanted, I could set the strategy, but the nitty gritty really fell to legal counsel. When I was at the WNBA, I also got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, where 2 of our players had unfortunately gotten into a domestic violence incident. They were dating each other at the time. My first call was to general counsel to help me understand. So I have found great partnership, and I feel like I've been very blessed to work with both within sports and beyond sports legal counsel. And I find it's like anything. The really good ones are the ones that do all the legal work, but because of the way in which they do that, they become so valuable that they become your trusted advisor. So it transcends their discipline, and they become partners with me in running the business and keeping us safe and keeping us healthy and keeping us out of trouble, right? And helping to see things that I might not see. So there's been a protective role that I have really appreciated, in addition to the more proactive role.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Laurel, we talked about culture earlier of the WNBA, and your points were well taken about focus and discipline. Talk a little bit about the culture of the NBA when you were president. What were the things that mattered most to you that you talked about constantly with the organization to set that tone? Make that concrete for us, if you would.
Yeah, so there were 2 things that were really important, or maybe 3. So I spoke a minute ago about I defined the mission as showing the world what's possible, what women can do as athletes and what athletes can do as citizens, because I wanted to make sure that we were not only focused on the game, but we, and this was in part because players and the franchise owners wanted it too. We believed that we were helping to change society and really helping establish We were the longest running women's professional sports league, and that was really important to us to lead the way and to be successful. So mission was really important to, as I would travel to teams, to reinforce and to remind people of how we define the business that we're in. A second piece was a path to profitability. I felt that it was really important for us not to just think about the impact that we would have on the world or the joy, bringing people the joy of sports. We were a business, and I wanted people to really think about not accepting the fact that sports teams lose money, but how can we be a league in which teams don't lose money, or the majority of teams don't lose money. So raising our aspirations from a business standpoint was really important. And then the third thing was to really embrace our fans. When I joined the league, I felt that we had many different constituencies in our fan base, but we had one of the most loyal groups of our fan base was the lesbian community. And I looked at all the marketing materials. I looked at all of our programming. I just felt like this was a very, very loyal part of our fan base that we, in my opinion, had not shown enough love, right? We had not really valued a community that had been with us since day one. So that was the other piece, is really understanding our fan base and supporting our fan base and thanking them, recognizing them and thanking them and acknowledging the role that they had played in the success of the league. So those were my key messages.
That's great. And one more quick question then, Shannon, you're up next. A lot of the tone that you set as the leader, there's the organization more broadly, but then there's also the culture of your leadership team. So simple question for you. If I was a direct report showing up to work with you on my first day and I said, Laurel, what's it like to work for you? What should I know about you? What are your pet peeves, your quirks? What's going to earn me an extra gold star? What would you tell me?
I would tell you I really value truth and directness. I get my directness from my dad, so I'm very direct, and I like for people to be direct with me. I like to be challenged, that if I had all the answers, I don't know anyone who has all the answers. And one of my greatest fears as a leader is that I will miss something. And so I like to be challenged. And then the other thing that I always tell people who that I'm working with, particularly at the beginning, is when I'm thinking, the expression on my face looks like a frown. And so I tell people that because I had this, at one point, there was a terrific person working for me, and she came into my office and she said, I'm sorry, I just got to get this out. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but you are frowning and I can't figure it out. I don't know what it is. So just go ahead and tell me. I'm screwing up and I got to know what I'm doing. And I was so glad she did that, because it was actually the opposite. She was really, really smart, really, really challenging. And so I was constantly frowning at her because I was thinking so hard. So I learned from that experience to let people know that a frown is a good thing. It just means I'm concentrating as opposed to I'm disappointed or angry.
Right. The acronym I heard is RPF, which stands for resting processing face.
I like that. I'm going to coin that.
RPF. Shannon, back to you.
Thank you. You talked about the hype around the 3-C, and you talked about being part of the 2014 CBA negotiations and being the first league to openly market to the LGBT community. So from your perspective, what would you consider your biggest successes and your biggest challenges during your tenure as WNBA president?
So, yeah, thanks. Happy to talk about that. I would say the biggest success, I do think getting at the time, the CBA was the longest agreement between the players and the league. And the beauty of that is when you've got the CBA set, you can then go about doing the work of growing the league. So I'm very proud of that. When I joined the league, 1 or 2 teams were profitable. And when I left, 6 teams were profitable. So that path to profitability, I was very proud of that. And I was very proud that we were the first professional sports league in the country to do to celebrate Pride Month and do it with our fans, our players, the teams. ESPN is our broadcast partner, and Procter & Gamble as a sponsor. So I was really proud of that. And I can still remember walking into the arena in Phoenix, and the way in which the team in Phoenix had activated Pride was they made these signs that said, "We are proud of." Oh, and I still got a little emotional, but one of the fans had wrote in, because everyone got to fill in the blank, and it said, "We are proud of the WNBA." So that may be like the single greatest moment.
That's great. Thank you. Other questions? Because I always have more. Laurel, would you indulge us? I totally get that you are probably talked out about it, but this is such a remarkable historic moment we're living in. Sense of heightened racism in the country and corporate America. I'm not going to ask you to go through everything, but just give us the highlights of the points that you make when people ask what can be done, what should be done.
Yeah, so I think I truly believe this is a moment of reckoning. I am as devastating as the moments that brought us here with COVID-19 and its disproportionate effect on communities of color. The filming that provides proof of police brutality against people of color. I mean, I think this moment in time is so comprehensive and so tangible and so devastating that we have a collective responsibility to respond to it now that there is greater universal awareness, because there's been great awareness among many communities. And I think the difference is now there's greater awareness among multiple communities. And I think the other thing that is different right now is the conversations that I'm having with people now versus a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I started at Ogilvy 30 years ago, is a much greater appreciation of the systemic nature of the issue. And when, I think that gives me hope, because if we're thinking or acknowledging systemic racism, then we collectively have the ability to figure out what do we need to do with our system and systems. So I think the good news in that is everybody has a role to play, whether it is choosing to think about government, to choosing to think about our educational system, choosing to think about our health system, thinking about public policy. The challenge is so massive that it's going to require all hands on deck. And with the groundswell of support, I feel like there are a lot of hands on deck. So I think the important things are to acknowledge it, to look first at the communities in which you live, compete, and operate, and see what you can do in those communities. I find that I look at Zoom screens differently now and see how diverse are the screens. It's another filter for everything that I'm doing and thinking about. And I think the really important thing is to bring more people of color into the conversations and into the room, right? So that's what I'm focused on.
That's great. Thank you. Alex Hull, you're up next.
Hi, Laurel. My name is Alex Hull. I'll be a one out at Columbia Law this fall. And I had a question with regards to recommendations that you would make to a young professional who has a goal in mind, say 20 years down the road, and is trying to figure out how to navigate a chart or a path, or chart a path rather, to get to that ultimate goal. And you spent over 20 years at Ogilvy and Mather. I think we're seeing a trend where a lot of young folks jump around, maybe spend 2 years somewhere and then jump somewhere else, maybe for a promotion or even for a lateral. So what would your strategic recommendations be for how to get to that ultimate place while still making the most of the time where they are and being present where they are and really soaking up that experience?
Yeah. So I used to, in my office, those little cards that are printable that have the sayings on them, and you can buy them on a dish. I can't remember the brand name. I should know that as a marketer. But anyway, for years, I had one in my office, and I cannot remember the author, but it said, "Begin anywhere." And I've held on to that, and I found that it works as good advice in almost any situation. So I would say to you, begin anywhere, that it's great that you have a goal of where you want to be 20 years out. I guarantee that any path you create today will not be the path that gets you there, just because lots of different opportunities are going to come your way. You're going to grow, you're going to develop, and you may think that you want to be due north, but with time, you may find, I want to be northwest rather than north. So I would say begin anywhere. It's great to have a plan, great to have a vision, get started, and be really open to the twists and turns. My 20-year plan would not have had run a sports league on it. It would have had a whole bunch of things, but that's not even a 180. I don't know what's bigger than a 180 but so I think it's about getting started and being open to the journey, because where you think you want to be today may be where you end up, but it also may be just the thing that gets you started to a different place that may be even greater than the one you can imagine today.
Speaking of career questions, I always love to ask executives, when you are hiring, what qualities do you look for? What are the X factors? And what questions do you ask in the job interview?
So qualities, I look for self-awareness, because I think in building teams, all of us have different strengths and all of us have different developmental areas. And so I like to build teams where I can really leverage everyone's strengths and help them work on the things that they want to work on. So if someone is aware and genuinely aware and comfortable talking about, my experience here is really good, I haven't had as much exposure to this, I'm interested in it, or 2 jobs ago I got some feedback that said I needed to work on this. So somebody who's aware and willing to talk about it, because I can find a better fit and I can then help them continue on their developmental journey. So I look for that. I look for curiosity. I will admit nothing drives me nuts than that point in the interview when you say, do you have any questions? And the person says, I have no questions. I'm like, I'm just, there's a part of me that wants to say, like, okay, see you later. Like, I'm out, right? Drop the mic. There's got to be one question, right? And so, and a genuine question, right? Like, I want to feel like someone's done their homework and they've thought about the organization, they've thought about the opportunity, they've really scoured the job description, they've researched my back, whatever it is, it's an evidence of industry, and a genuine curiosity is really important. And the question that I always ask is, if I were to go to your current boss, your best friend, and someone who you've had a tense relationship with and ask them what they valued most in you, what would they say? And sometimes, it can be the same thing. Sometimes they'll all say the same thing. Sometimes they'll say very different things, but I'm trying to get a sense of their DNA, right? And how they show up. And I'll admit there's it usually gets truthful answers because people realize, oh my gosh, she could ask me if I could call her current boss, her best friend, and this person. So I find that it elevates the discussion and usually reveals pretty fundamental things about the individual.
And will you indulge me if I turn the tables and ask you how you would answer that question?
I will indulge you. So I don't know that I have a current boss, but most of my bosses have said tenacity. That sort of, I had a performance review that said she is a cross between a dog with a bone and a dance partner to Fred Astaire. And so I think that's sort of tenacity with grace. My best friend would say I am honest almost to a fault. We went to school together, and Dartmouth operates on the honor principle, and she was in an astronomy class, and word got out that the astronomy test, the final test, had been circulating in the community, and it was in between two cushions in the student union. And she goes into her final exam, and the professor stands up and says, "It's come to my attention that the exam has been circulating, so the exam has been canceled, and your grade is going to be based on your midterm." And she marched from her class to me and said, I don't even have to ask you. I know that you're the one who called the professor and said the test is in circulation. And I'm like, yeah, I did, because the honor principle says that if, your responsibility is to be honest and truthful and fair, and knowing that someone is cheating is the same, and not reporting it as cheating. So she would say honest to a fault. And I think someone who I've had tension with would say a hard fighter, a fighter for her opinion, but when it's over, it's over. And I think there's my desire to heal relationships is as great as my desire to be right, probably.
Good. Anybody else want to jump in? Because as you probably figured out, I've always got questions. All right, so I'm going to ask another question. Laurel, I have this kind of fascination with marketing. I'm interested in it, but I feel like I don't always know why something works or doesn't. What is the difference between a great marketer and a good marketer?
I think a great marketer knows their product and knows their target audience, and knows how to find the common space between the two, right? A really deep insight into the motivations of why people buy things. So, and I learned that lesson early on. I remember one of my first presentations when I joined Leo Burnett in Chicago, they were talking about laundry detergent and the reasons for purchase, and price, and how well it cleans the clothes, and the ingredients, and whether it has, bleach in the powder, and all of these sort of incredibly rational, tangible things. And then the person who was presenting said, the real reason people buy Tide is because it reminds them of the way their laundry smelled when their mother did their laundry. And so people sort of, you put your hand on the pillow at night, or you're folding the towel in front of you, and it's not about whether it is cleaner or cheaper. It's about really strong memories of your childhood and what your mother did for you. And I say mother because at that point in time, it was women who were doing the laundry. But, and I remember in that moment, just holding on to that idea of really understanding your target audience and really understanding their motivation and designing products to meet their articulated and sometimes unarticulated needs.
That's great. Thank you. Tracy Rosenthal.
Hi, Laurel. Thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I have a question about something I'm trying to navigate in my professional life, and that is having hard conversations with peers and management. So I was just wondering if you have any instances of hard conversations that you've had that have turned, they've been difficult, but they've also been productive. I have a tendency to beat around the bush, which makes things a little bit unclear when trying to get my point across. So any advice there would be great. Thank you so much.
That's a great question, because I think we're all having a lot of hard conversations on multiple levels. So I think a couple things. One is being really prepared for the conversation, right? Because they are uncomfortable. So I try to really map out everything that I want to say, why I want to say it, the examples, if I need them, of behaviors or whatever, but to sort of run through the whole conversation in my head so that in the moment, which, by nature you get a little tense, if I'm really, really well prepared, then I can sort of take a deep breath and keep going. So I think preparation is really important. I think acknowledging either when you're setting up the conversation or beginning the conversation that you want to have a conversation that's going to be, that you think might be difficult, and you just want to acknowledge that up front so that the person is prepared for it and at least has a moment to get their sea legs underneath them. I think trying to own the pieces of whatever own your role, your responsibility, owning your feelings, and making, I think sometimes tough conversations, if it feels like you're pointing fingers at the other person and identifying everything they did wrong, I think there's greater success in saying, here's how I'm feeling about this. Here's how I experienced it. So own your reaction and give them, and in so doing, you're giving them the benefit of the doubt on their intention. You're just speaking from the impact of it. And the other thing that I would say is enter into it like with a pure heart, right? So even if it's a tough conversation, I believe that people can feel when you are genuinely trying to make something better, genuinely trying to understand, genuinely hurt because of something that's happened, genuinely frustrated, that the more you can really be authentic, I think it increases chances of a good conversation. And the other thing I would say is knowing that sometimes you have to stop the conversation in the middle and agree to pause and come back to it. And because sometimes barreling straight through it ends up doing more damage than good. And so sometimes there's why don't we table this and take a break and both go think about what we've talked about so far and come back at it another day to see if we can progress it.
Great. Thank you, Laurel. We have time for one more question that goes to Jeremy Cooper.
Hi, Laurel. Just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. I actually interned for the NBA a couple years ago and saw firsthand the growth that you brought to the WNBA, a couple of the projects I worked with them as well. My question is more fun, but also has an element of seriousness on the race front. I'm curious if you saw Little Fires Everywhere and what you thought of how it depicted race relations in Shaker Heights, as well as, you know, the backyard that you grew up.
Yeah. So I read the book. I haven't seen the movie. And, you know, Shaker's a really interesting, and in fairness, I should say, full disclosure, I can't remember all the dynamics of the book. I remember thinking, I kind of read it trying to imagine, did they actually go to Shaker? And do I know that house? Do I know that street? Do I know that? So there was a little bit, I think I was reading it a little bit for recognition of my hometown rather than content. What I will say about Shaker, and one of the things I'm really proud of, is it is one of the few communities in the country that has worked very hard and quite successfully to maintain racial balance. That a historically white community that actively sought to build a more integrated community and maintain a level of integration rather than having it go from all white to all black. I'm proud of that, and my parents were actually very involved in organizations that worked really hard to make it a welcoming and inclusive community. So I can't speak to the book per se, but I can, and it's been a while since I've been back to Shaker, but for a very, very long time, I was not perfect in any means, because no community is perfect, but I was proud of that aspect of Shaker.
That's great. Thank you. So we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to wrap. Laurel, I could talk to you all day. I always learn a tremendous amount from you, and the insights, the stories behind them. I know for myself, I learned a ton, and I'm guessing I'm speaking for everybody who joined feels the same way. So if we could all give a virtual round of applause for Laurel, for your time and your insights, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for great questions, and it was nice to spend an evening with you, and I wish you all the very, very best, and I'm heartened that there are so many WNBA fans on the call. So thank you guys, and best of luck.